Hey everybody! It's so great to see y'all back on my channel. Today I'm thrilled to have a very special guest, Poonam Lowell, join us. Poonam has a wealth of experience in product and product management, and we're going to be diving into her journey, exploring her path in both roles, as well as how she was able to make the transition. Welcome, Poonam. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me, Helinda. Hey everyone, my name's Poonam.
Yeah, so could you start off by telling us a little bit about yourself, your background, and your career so far?
Yeah, happy to. So I kind of had a kind of non-traditional path to where I am today. I actually started my career at PwC, where I was working in asset management audits. So auditing the largest investment management firms in the world. And after a few years of doing this, I realized I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. And I actually wanted to work in tech. So living in San Francisco, I was surrounded by a lot of operators, founders, investors, and felt this like natural curiosity to want to work in tech myself since I was surrounded by that. So after working in the audit space for a few years, I was able to transition to a healthcare startup as a program manager. And after about a year there, I got the opportunity to work at Meta in their trust and safety org as a product operations manager. I was there for about 5 years. And then after that, I transitioned to product management at Spotify.
That's awesome. Amazing career progression. And yeah, would love to kind of double click into that a bit more in terms of, why you made the transitions in a bit. Um,
Awesome.
yeah, can you help us understand the role of product operations and how it differs from product management?
Yes. So I think like taking a step back before even answering that question, product operations is actually something that I think is very specific to larger companies because, larger companies just have a much larger user base. So you do need this additional role that works hand in hand with product management. So I would say, you know, product management is focused on, discovery, vision setting, getting everyone bought in on your long-term strategy, essentially the what. And then product operations is very much focused on figuring out how do we launch the what. So that's things like managing engineering deliverables, unblocking issues that might come up with the product or metrics, negotiating with teams like finance on budgets and legal for approvals you need to get to launch, etc. So I think in a nutshell, product operations is very much focused on execution.
Got it. And I think one question that I think would come up is there's also other roles such as, you know, TPM, technical program management, as well as even design program management or program management that kind of also focuses on execution. What do you
Yeah.
think are the differences between those two roles versus prod ops that also focus on execution?
Yeah, I think at least, when I was in product operations at a company like Meta, I think product operations and program management are pretty similar. I think it's important to not only think about what a person does based off of their title. Titles don't always paint the biggest picture. I do think there's a lot of overlap. I think product operations is specifically, embedded into a product team. Whereas I think sometimes a program manager could not be associated with any sort of product at all. They could be more on, like the change management side of things, or, just like internal company operations to make sure that, we're keeping the lights on. So, yeah, so I think that's probably the biggest distinction.
Yeah, I think I totally agree. I think I also saw that at Meta where with TPMs you're kind of operating multiple different products, so you're kind of on kind of a higher level scale versus like with product you're probably much more embedded within the product team at each stage of the product development lifecycle. Makes sense. What did you enjoy about each of the roles and what did you not enjoy?
That's a really good question. I think overall I'm really glad that I've had exposure to both of the roles. I think since product operations is focused on execution, it gave me huge exposure as well as appreciation for how to successfully launch a product or experience while also dealing with the countless issues that conveniently come up on or around launch day. So I think it just really ingrained in me how to get things done from end to end, make sure things run smoothly, make sure everyone's on the same page. I have yet to have a launch day that goes like very smoothly. So I think it just also told me to not be too married to one idea of how something will turn out and just be really nimble and able to do well thinking on my feet if something goes wrong. I mean, that's a really important part of working in product in general. Things don't always go as expected. Um, I think one thing that maybe in hindsight that I didn't enjoy as much is, product ops is focused on execution. And at least at a larger company like Meta, that process is, a bit of a well-oiled machine, but that can also become a bit cyclical. So I think at a certain point, I think the cyclical aspect was something that I didn't enjoy after a while.
Got it. Makes sense. I guess one question that I have for you is, like, kind of going back to your background earlier. You mentioned you were, at, PwC in asset management, and you transitioned to program management, and then you joined Meta as in prod ops. Can you talk a little bit more deeply in terms of your decisions, as to like why you made these transitions along the way?
Yeah, definitely. So, like I shared at the beginning, realized at a certain point, asset management audits was not what I wanted to do long term. Everyone I knew at the time was working in tech, so I was surrounded by it. And I really liked the idea of how working in tech, regardless of, what the company does or what their product or service is, you're essentially trying to reinvent the wheel and innovate some part of our day-to-day lives, or create something that doesn't exist. And I just found that really interesting. And so I took it upon myself to start teaching myself SQL and other hard skills to better position myself to ideally join a tech company. And I was able to join a company called Alto Pharmacy as an early employee. I was their, first program manager hire focused on OpEx for the entire company. And that was my first foray into tech. But I think similar to, all the roles I've had in tech is whether you're a large company or a smaller company, you have to really be an owner in the work that you do. And I've always enjoyed that aspect. There's no playbook. There isn't necessarily someone to hold your hand on how to do something. You usually have to figure it out yourself. And, this was years ago. So that actually was pretty scary for me, to be trusted to build these brand new programs from scratch at this 50-person Series B startup at the time. And, it felt like a big weight and a lot of pressure, but I think that was really essential for me to become the operator and the leader that I have become in these roles ever since then. So yeah, I'm really glad I took the plunge. And I was at Alto for about a year, and then someone at Meta reached out to me to join the Trust and Safety org, and I am so glad that I made the decision to join.
Got it. Was there anything particular about prod ops though that kind of piqued your interest, that made you go from, a program manager at Alto to Meta, or was it more around the company that you were looking for in terms of the change?
Yeah, I would say it was two things. Working, like, to be quite frank, working at a company like Meta, several years ago was definitely on, like one of my goals to hit. And so being given that opportunity was definitely something that was in line with how I wanted my career to progress. And I think also it was not as much the type of role, but more so the org that the role was positioned in. So trust and safety just really stood out to me. So this was in the year 2018, summer of 2018. And at that time, there had been a lot of news around Meta and other large tech companies, things like Cambridge Analytica, et cetera. So, thinking about working in an org like trust and safety just felt very relevant, very exciting. Also, a lot of unknowns and things to really figure out and improve on. US 2020 elections were right around the corner, which was a big focus for this org. So I just felt like from that perspective, that's what enticed me. So those are the two main things, not necessarily focused on like the role title itself.
Got it. Makes sense. Makes sense. So now that you've kind of been in both operations as well as in product management, how has your approach to product decisions evolved?
Yeah, I would say that, I think it's important to ideally have exposure and experience in both operations and management. I think that just makes you a more holistic sort of leader, essentially. But I think regardless of role, I think one thing that is key for effective decision making, for effective product decision making, is to really be able to recreate the exact experience you're trying to improve, or the idea that you're trying to create for your end users, and to essentially see what it's like for yourself, right? Whether it's actually putting yourself in their shoes, shadowing them, interviewing them, etc. I think user empathy isn't something that can be solely gleaned from like a research document. Whether I was in a product role or a PM role, being able to really understand what's the user going through, whether it's an internal user, an external user, I think that's really key to making decisions really well. And if that piece is missing, I think the roadmap that you create and the KPIs that you're trying to hit are gonna, at a certain point, come to a head and essentially miss the point of what you're trying to achieve. So I think user empathy is really key.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense in terms of just like you said, if we're chasing after a certain KPI or metric, right? A lot of sort of the underlying problems that a user has just doesn't get seen with specific metrics, right? So kind of really having that empathy. I know some companies actually, like DoorDash is a really great example where they have all of their employees do at least one delivery each month, right? To really understand the challenges that Dashers go through. So, yeah, I agree. I think having that empathy is key to making product decisions and just overall being a really great product leader.
Yeah, and I think on that note, I think it's definitely difficult to do that when you're a huge, like big tech company. But when I originally joined Alto, so Alto Pharmacy, they're a tech-enabled pharmacy essentially. And when I had joined the company, it was about 50, 60 people. We're just based in San Francisco in the Bay Area. Now we're like all across the country. But that was something that was important for the team at the time, to have every single employee, regardless of role, fulfill a delivery, work on the front lines and talk to patients on the phone, talk to doctors on the phone, etc. And I just think, if you truly believe in what a company's doing, if you really want to innovate and help like push the needle on things, I think it's important to put yourself in like the end experience. So I didn't know that about DoorDash, and that's really neat.
Yep. Yeah. So I actually used to work at a company that was kind of we were trying to become a competitor to DoorDash, and so I also became a Dasher and Instagram cart delivery person, and also an Uber driver as well.
Oh, what surprised you about the experience when you had to go through it yourself?
Just the details. I didn't realize how difficult it is to find, for example, a really with a big apartment complex, where the specific apartment is in that big complex, and I've got lost numerous times, and just little things like that that you never really would have thought of. I
Yeah.
also did another delivery where I it was like a return package. So I went to the customer's house, and the person was actually on the phone for 40 minutes before being able to come and provide me the package to bring back. So I think just little things that just nuances. I don't think I think as a product manager, if I were kind of just sitting behind my desk, I probably wouldn't have really understood these pain points.
Yeah, that's so fair. And I think what you mentioned about finding the specific unit in an apartment complex, that's so real for any sort of like courier experience. And it just reminds me of within the Alto app, when I was at the company, we launched a ton of different features within our app, but one of them was delivery instructions, which seems so basic and simple, but it actually makes a world of a difference with, excuse me, with the delivery completion time for a dasher or any courier. And I'm sure at whatever point at DoorDash or at Alto, they realized that pain point. That's what led them to create those features that now save a lot of time. Um, but yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, yeah. I know we're kind of running short on time, so last question is, I know that you mentor a lot of folks that are kind of transitioning into product management. What advice do you often give yourself giving or find yourself giving?
Yeah, I I love mentoring people because I've been there, you know, essentially lost and trying to figure out how do I get to that sort of role for that company, etc. So I love giving back when I can. Um, there's a few things that I always try to stress to mentees, and sometimes not all of this is applicable. Sometimes it just depends who the person is and where they are in their career. But I'll just go through them all. So the first thing I always really encourage is, you know, one, do the work. I don't think you have to have a PM title to do the work of a product manager. I think if you work at a tech enabled company, you're already further ahead than so many other people trying to break into PM. So you're surrounded by those sort of roles and teams. You probably, you know, have a sense for how the role operates, etc. So essentially, if you have an idea, create a roadmap, figure out who should own what, get feedback. And perhaps people won't look at it at first or might think, what are you doing? But I think taking that initiative, showing that level of critical thinking, showing that you can think from end to end on how to get somewhere. I think if you continuously do that over time, it can help in the long run. So I just always encourage people to just like do the work, and show it to people if you can. Um, the second thing I really stress is product manager interviews, as I'm sure you understand as well, are very specific in that there's specific types of interviews and cases that you'll have to go through. And it might vary by company, but usually things like product sense, product strategy, analytics. So I think knowing the different types of interviews to prep for it is key. There's a lot of websites out there now that provide this sort of home base for you to understand the material, understand how to answer them, etc. Um, Try Exponent is like the OG website I started using a few years ago when I was trying to transition to becoming a PM. I think it's really important to also practice company cases like Amazon, YouTube, etc., with a reliable friend that's competent PM that you can get feedback from and learn from as well during those mock interviews. And then I also think, kind of going back to my first point, if you already work in a tech environment, you know some PMs. Let's just say you work at a company and there's 10 PMs. Send a quick note to all 10 of them if you're comfortable. and just be upfront and share something like, hey, I'm Poonam. I've been working here for a few years now. This is what I do. I'm working on making the transition to, you know, a PM role. This is what I've done so far. Would love to talk to you about, um, any other advice you'd have or any suggestions you might make with my transition. And, maybe three of those PMs might get back to you and you can get coffee with them for 15 minutes. But I think doing something like that is really important because as a PM, you're going to have to do a lot of the cold outreach and having those uncomfortable conversations to get people to talk to you. So I think doing that itself is a good idea. And then last but not least, I know this is not always accessible to people, but if you're able to identify a mentor, I think that goes a long way. I view a mentor as someone that you want to emulate, whether it's for PM or something else. But again, just mustering up the courage to like tell the person, hey, I'm really impressed by what you've done. I've been following you, or I've really enjoyed this work that you've done. I'd love to learn from you. Do you have time, I don't know, once a month or once every other week, where I can share with you what I'm thinking of, what I'm stuck on, and I'd love your guidance along the way. So I know I just said a lot, but I think a lot of those can apply to different people in certain parts of their career.
That's awesome. Well, thanks so much for sharing. I think that's all the time we have for today. Thanks again, Pudong, for all your wisdom and insights, and I hope this was helpful for folks. Thanks again.
Thanks so much for having me. Bye, Helinda.
Bye.